Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to this, which is the fourth of our Sundowner webinar series for the Grassland Society of Southern Africa and the first of 2021. So a big welcome to all of the participants and all of the listeners. I'm sure there'll be more people joining in the next couple of minutes. And in the meantime, I'm going to start off with giving an introduction to our speaker and some background to that. And by the time we've done with that, I'm sure that most people will have joined in. Before I start with introducing our speaker, I just want to mention that these webinars now count for CPD points for those people who require CPD points for SACNASP registration. So attending the webinar will get you some points. So just please take note of that. Right, to move on to our speaker and to give an introduction to our speaker, we are very lucky this afternoon to have Paulo Carvalho from Brazil in South America, and more specifically from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, which is located in Porto Alegre in southern Brazil, right on the edge of the Pampas grasslands. So a very beautiful part of Brazil. Now, Brazil and South America, particularly the southern parts of South America, have got a lot in common with South Africa. In fact, Porto Alegre is at exactly the same latitude as Durban, approximately 30 degrees south. So in terms of climate, vegetation conditions, etc., there are a lot of similarities. But for various reasons, I think including language barriers, we haven't had as much contact with South American scientists as we should. And hence this afternoon's invitation to Paulo to come and give us an overview of a topic that is really interesting, and hopefully he can shed some light on what the South American grassland and agricultural environment is like. And hopefully this will also set the scene for further contact between the countries and the continents, and potentially further collaboration and development of science between the two countries. So Paulo is going to be talking to us about recoupling crops and animals to recover landscape multifunctionality and resilience. And those are issues that are important in South and Southern Africa as well. And in particular in South Africa, I think we've been very isolationist in terms of how we deal with animal production and how we deal with grassland ecology and management. And so Paulo's talk will hopefully set the scene for maybe moving a little bit closer and integrating animals into our grassland and pasture management. Now, Paulo, as you can see from his CV that we circulated with the advert, is quite a busy guy. Apart from being a full professor at the University of Rio Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre, he's been a visiting scientist at the Crop and Grassland Service of the FAO of the United Nations, coordinator of Animal Science Advisory Committee of the National Council for Scientific and Technological Development in Brazil. He's a member of the Committee on Low Carbon Agriculture, chair of the Intelligence Board of Intelligence Service in Agribusiness. He's the current director of the Brazilian Society of Animal Production and also president of the Brazilian Society of Integrated Crop Livestock Systems. And quite importantly, and well done on this, he featured in a study by Stanford University on the list of 2% of the most influential researchers in the world in 2019. So well done on that. And Paulo, I think that's enough of the introductions, and over to you. We really look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Kevin. I will start by sharing the screen. So please tell me if it's working now.
Yes,
is it?
That is very fun.
Great, great. Thank you very much. Well, okay. So, well, good afternoon, good morning. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Kirkman and the Grassland Society for this invitation that really honored me. I have less than 40 minutes to present to you how the recoupling of crops and animals can recover landscape multifunctionality and resilience. So let's move on it. So this is the outline I propose to present this issue. First, I will briefly introduce our lab and our research questions to give you a general picture. And then I will present the integrated crop livestock systems in Brazil, the trends, benefits, and opportunities to recouple grazing animals and crops in agricultural landscapes, how it's going on at farm level. And then examples of outcomes in integrated crop livestock systems using data from our long-term research protocols. And finally, present a case study on ICLS oriented to dairy farms and sustainability, which is the most important extension program that we have here in southern Brazil. So let me present a brief introduction of the alliance that is responsible by all knowledge I will share with you today. In addition to my university, I am as Kevin mentioned already, I am the director of a non-profit organization that assembles public universities and the private sector. We get together to foster sustainable intensification using ICLS as the main technological pillar, aiming to design sustainable food production systems. So we are researchers, teachers, students, field consultants, and entrepreneurs committed to the future of sustainable food production. And we built a network to foster dialogue, knowledge exchange, and collaboration among all involved in integrated crop livestock systems and any other related topic to sustainable intensification. We have been investigating integrated crop livestock systems since the 90s. I would say that our originality remains on studies that focus on the reintroduction of livestock into no-till cash crop systems. We have long-term experimental units across the country dealing with different production systems that I will present briefly with its research questions to provide you a general picture of what we are doing here. So this is the oldest one regarding integrated crop livestock systems. Since 2001, so 20 years ago, we are investigating how grazing intensity affects soybean production with soybean in rotation with black oat and Italian ryegrass mixtures. So the question is how grazing intensity affects soybean production. The second long-term experiment is a model for small farms. We investigate the effect of grazing methods and grazing intensity on crop production in a maize, soybean, Italian ryegrass rotation, sheep being the animal model. This is since 2003. In a more recent protocol, this is the one that we focus on rice systems, investigating how crop rotations and the recoupling of livestock in time and space affect the whole system functioning. So the question is how diversity in time and space can affect system performance. This is, I would say, a rare protocol. This is the only experiment where we have the tree component, which is eucalyptus. We have all combinations of pure and combined pastures, crops, and trees, all the combinations. And we work on protected areas, meaning that we cannot use any chemicals at all. So the question is, can we design diverse integrated crop livestock systems with no chemicals? This one is located on a very sandy soils, meaning 11% 11%, how to say, argila. There's 11% argila. I'm trying to get the word, the correct word. Clay. Okay, just 11% clay, where maize, cotton, and panicum rotations are challenged to improve the overall system resilience. So the question in these vulnerable areas is the increase in resilience by integration crops and livestock. And finally, we have been studying grazing intensities in a long-term research unit located in the experimental station of my university. This is a long-term grazing study, parallel grazing study that supports many of the hypotheses and knowledge that we applied in the pasture phase of integrated systems. This is right now a 35-year study on how grazing intensities affects primary and secondary production. So in all those protocols, our research group tried to investigate and propose diverse cropping systems and the recoupling of crops and livestock on agricultural landscapes. I will share with you some results from these long-term experiments and also present how this knowledge has been applied in practice. But first, let's start with a brief contextualization of what happens in my country. So Brazil represents a large portion of South America, a big country rich in natural resources, of course, with big challenges and huge opportunities. We have 65% of our 850 million hectares as natural vegetation. Around 200 million hectares are pastures. Yeah. And 60 million hectares are agriculture, and soybean represents about 40 million hectares of that 60 million. So it's important to state that this is mandatory by law. Private farms must keep 20 to 8% of their original vegetation. So from the south up to the north, in the Amazon part, for example, the private farm is mandatory to keep 80% of natural vegetation. To give you an idea, a picture of what's happening in Brazil in terms of integrated systems, there is an increasing in these systems in Brazil, despite trends on agricultural specialization that we will talk later on. In 2005, it was less than 2 million hectares, and now reached more than 17 million hectares, according to recent publications. So this is an increasing trend. And the main integrated system used in Brazil are combinations of cash crops with pastures. Trees are increasing because Embrapa is doing a good job promoting trees as an important component of integrated systems, so it is increasing right now. But the coupling of crops and livestock is not a general trend, not in Brazil and not everywhere. Since the Green Revolution, agricultural landscapes are becoming more and more specialized. This picture illustrates rice paddy fields as an example of very intensive specialized crops. In Brazil or in Japan, during a large period, these areas remain uncovered. Crop farmers produce only one commodity per year. A huge loss of diversity is the consequence of these very uniform landscapes. We have been working in a group that believes that modern, uniform agriculture is more and more disconnected from nature. The separation of crops and livestock is just one of the signals. Highly intensive systems based on high inputs and specialization have produced landscapes functionally poor. This group believes that the problem is not the intensification per se, but intensification with less diversity. And what are the consequences of this great general trend? Is the disruption of biogeochemical cycles exemplified by nitrogen and phosphorus unmanaged flows and loss of diversity, which are the most visible side effects of modern agriculture. So what we propose? We propose the recoupling of crops and livestock as a measure to recover landscape diversity and multifunctionality. In this paper, this is a very recent one, we describe these trends in South America. We focus on the Rio de la Plata region, which comprises the Argentina, Uruguay, and southern Brazil, where in recent decades, it has been characterized by the advance of cropping areas over native grasslands. Highly specialized agriculture has decoupled crop and livestock production, but has succeeded in intensifying yields. However, significant losses of ecosystem services have been reported. In this paper, we propose alternatives to redesign multifunctional landscapes based on integrated crop livestock systems. We will show some during this talk. This redesign is proposed not only because integrated crop livestock systems are more diverse than specialized systems, but also because they reconciliate agro-ecosystem intensification and environmental quality. And this is quite rare for a model of production system. So what are the drivers that generate opportunities to the redesign of agricultural landscapes in practice? How are farmers proceeding the most? In Brazil, the recoupling of crops and livestock has been proceeded according to two main strategies. In the tropical region of Brazil, crops such as soybean have been used to recover degraded tropical pastures, mainly Urochloa or Panicum songresses, pastures degraded by overstocking and lack of fertilization. Soybean being a strategy to a cheap recover of soil fertility. So this is crops being integrated to livestock. In the southern, in the subtropical part of Brazil, the strategy is to fulfill the winter phase of summer cash crops. Wheat is the main winter grain crop used in rotations with soybean and maize, but it represents less than 20% of the cultivated areas. So almost 80% of summer cash crops areas remain with non-grazed cover crops, such as black oats and Italian ryegrass in this picture. Forages just growing to protect soils and provide the cover to the no-till. And this is the same period, which is coincident with the main shortage in forage production of our native grasslands, which are most C4 grasses. So in theory, it's a win-win situation. However, crop farmers are very reluctant in reintroducing livestock on no-till areas because of soil compaction. So this is the origin of our late initial experiments, how to manage grazing animals in no-till cash crop areas. Since then, we have been through a sequence of new research questions. So let's move to this sequence with a few examples of benefits from reintroducing grazing animals in these landscapes. Soil compaction is a paradigm in no-till areas. We started investigating how to not provoke soil compaction by managing stocking rate and by using different grazing methods. We were surprised, and these are two examples of papers on this issue. We were surprised by long-term results that indicate that not only moderate grazing avoids soil compaction, but there are soil physical parameters, such as soil aggregation, that could be also improved by grazing. So grazing animals can even improve soil physical parameters. An important challenge for future production systems is to produce more in less area with less inputs. In other words, increase the nutrient use efficiency. This paper of our group illustrates how integrated systems are more efficient in nutrient use. We compare non-grazed areas, non-grazed cover crop areas with grazed cover crop areas. And in non-grazed cover crop areas, the protein production per unit area is only soybean, and it takes 250 kilograms of calcium, 8 kilograms of magnesium, and 75 kilograms of potassium to produce 1 ton of edible protein per hectare, while in the integrated systems, the protein produced comes from soybean and from, in this case, steers, taking less nutrients to produce the same amount of edible protein per hectare, meaning 90 kilograms of calcium, 30 of magnesium, and 70 kilograms of potassium. This is very important for future production systems. Produce more using less area and less inputs. In this paper, we use data from 3 of our long-term experiments, again comparing non-grazed cover crops to grazed ones, to conclude that integrated systems had greater soil phosphorus content as total and bioavailable orthophosphate. So grazing increases bioavailability and reduces recalcitrant organic phosphorus in farming systems. Concerning carbon, in this review, a colleague of mine shows the increase in carbon stocks from integrated systems in different soil types and conditions. From the left to the right, the no-till is in green, which is already a good technique to improve carbon stocks. But when no-till is used with animals in rotation with crops, the carbon stocks is even boosted by grazing animals, which are in blue. So integrated crop livestock systems using grazing animals are very successful in improving soil carbon in many different locations, in many different soil types, and many different production systems. So it's very solid, I would say. In a very recent paper, this is another example, one of our PhD students published the system fertilization concept derived from studies of nutrient cycling from our lab. In this paper, we present evidence that we can use the nutrient cycling promoted by the pasture phase to fertilize the entire systems, which is this one. Meaning one-time fertilization and soybean receiving phosphorus and potassium through pastures. This was compared against I would say, the traditional way of doing fertilization and other different combinations of fertilization strategy. What is important to stress is that the integrated crop livestock systems were able to produce 29% more edible energy equivalent compared to pure crop systems, which is fertilized with traditional non-system recommendations. So this is a very recent evidence, again, that we can produce more with less. In another recent paper, I present another feature of integrated systems. This paper brings evidence of long-term stability as an important characteristic of systems in which livestock was recoupled to soybean monoculture. Using a 16-year dataset, we suggest that yield resistance and stability are improved by the presence of the grazing animal. In red is the pure cropping systems, and the other, they are all integrated systems, and the numbers refers to the sward high in which the system is managed, so different grazing intensities. In this data set, one can notice that mean human digestible protein production and profitability, you can see in this column, for the non-grazed cover crops. The grazed systems are much more performant on the production of human digestible protein production per hectare, and also in profitability. But I would say more than that, the difference in years experiencing draw are much higher. If you see this column, minimum yield potential, we in these years, the difference is even higher for grazed systems compared to non-grazed systems. So in other words, livestock is the component responsible to stabilize the system. This is another paper where under simulated future climate conditions, we did this one with colleagues from UC Davis in California and CSIRO. Under simulated future climate conditions, integrated system productivity exceeded specialized system productivity in 95% of the years. despite declines in the average soybean yield and cover crop biomass production due to climate change. So if integrated systems are important now to stabilize pure crop systems, it will be even more important in the future. This is what is indicated in this paper. So just a few words to say that as grazing is so important on these landscapes, this is just a few words to say we have been developing a concept in grazing management called rotatinous stocking, a blend of words continuous and rotational from the grazing methods, continuous stocking and rotational stocking, which is a concept based on animal ingestive behavior, assuming time as the main constraint to animal production in pasture-based systems. I don't have time to explore this issue, but just mentioning that we use this concept on natural, pure sown or pastures integrated with crops. If you want to know more, these are two recent papers we published about. So we have been studying the effects on animal welfare, animal production, methane emissions, and so on. So we use this grazing strategy in integrated crop livestock systems. So most of the results I presented are derived from the use of the rotatinous concept. So we have 27 minutes presentation. Let me conclude and present our most important extension project called PISA. PISA is the Portuguese acronym to Integrated Crop Livestock Systems. In this program, we work with farmers putting in practice the redesign of agricultural landscapes. So let's move on farm and regional level now. PISA is a model of blended intensification frameworks aiming at agricultural development and sustainability. Of course, integrated livestock systems are a pillar in this program, but we use a lot of tools to this spatio-temporal organization of recoupling crops and animals to increase diversity, to foster nutrient cycling, and to cover the soil constantly. We use, of course, conservative agricultural tools as no-till. We try to increase carbon stocks, and we use the rotatinous stocking concept to increase the nutrients ingested from pasture, to increase the autonomy of farms and decrease family working loads. We use, in fact, many techniques to make the transition to these real redesigned landscapes. So let's show you what are the characteristics of the farmers that we work. Small farmers are our main public. On average, they have small areas, 18 hectares, more or less, and they milk around 14 cows that produce around 13 liters a day, based on silage and concentrate. Pastures usually makes less than 30% of the cow's diet. One of our aims in redesigning the system is to make pastures provide more than 60% of cow's diet, and introducing diversity in the forage and crop metrics, as well as decreasing inputs per unit of milk produced. The rotatinous concept works very well because a milking cow is a truly example of a grazing time constraint. We have non-published data showing increases in milk production by 60% on average of more than 1,000 farms. increases in organic matter by 0.5% a year. This is the average of a 4-year project, and demonstrating the decrease in the vulnerability of these systems to external prices and inputs. We have already reached 1,819 small farms with this approach. And now these PISA programs are recognized as a benchmark in southern Brazil. So let me show you an example of consequences in terms of different dimensions of sustainability. We talk a lot of sustainability, but it's rare that we have or the opportunity to, or the means to really assess the sustainability. We use this tool from FAO, which is the SAFA, Sustainability Assessment of Food and Agriculture Systems, which evaluate 4 different dimensions of sustainability. So this one is a result of 79 farms that we have recently evaluated by this tool. And this is a paper that we have just submitted this week, showing that more than increasing 79% in gross margin of these small farms, all the, this is, I guess, 21 different indicators of the 4 different dimensions, in which this is the average of the 79 farms, and all scored between best and good for all indicators after the 4 years project. So at the end, the PISA approach has been successful in promoting sustainability in all dimensions. Integrated crop livestock systems has been promoting, as I hope have showed to you, has been proving as a solid way forward sustainable food production. To deal with this huge challenge of producing with less area, less inputs, and less environmental impacts, integrated crop livestock systems are truly a rare option to conciliate production and conservation. So this is our belief, this is the results that we have, and this is the system that we are putting our efforts, because of these future challenges are not easy to cope with, and we truly believe that integrated crop livestock systems can answer to these main questions dealing with the future of food production. To finish with a take-home message, these complex systems, because the recoupling of crops and animals are complex systems, this is not an easy path. In general, humans don't like complex systems. They are difficult to manage, they are difficult to understand, and they are difficult to explain, even more when you are not a non-native English speaker using a poor vocabulary. I'm really glad about the opportunity to share our thoughts with you, but please consider me as just a representative of a huge bunch of persons producing the knowledge I presented. I thank you for your patience. We have 35 minutes. Kevin said me between 30 and 40, so 35 That's it. Thank you very much.
Paulo, thank you very much for that awesome presentation. I was so impressed by the profitability figures that you put forward of, a monocrop of $446 up to $1,068 per hectare. I mean, that's really significant. And if that's not an incentive, well, I don't know what would be. So I'd like to invite our delegates to please post questions in the chat box and I will read them out. We already have one question for Paulo from Kevin, and he'd like to ask about the status of Eragostis plana or anonigrass invasion in the Pampas grasslands. And I'm not sure if Eragostis curvula is also a problem. If you could chat to us about that, please.
Okay, thank you, David. No, curvula is not a problem. It's plana, the really problem. So I have written to Kevin that right now we have probably more than 2 million hectares already invaded by this grass. So yeah, this is a huge problem. When Kevin visited us in the 2002 or 2003, I guess, Kevin, it was a problem, and now it's even more. It's even more. So this is a huge problem. And thanks for who wrote Clay, but I was not reading the chat. But thanks for the help. The word Clay.
Sure. And then I have a question for you. I was very interested in the rule that each landowner needs to set aside a certain percentage. I think it was 20 to 80%. I think you said. I'm very interested in that because that is something that we tried to do in our province to bring it into legislation. So I was just wondering what mechanism was used to create that legislation, and then how successful you think it is.
Well, the mechanism is politics, no? So this is a law, so we have to respect. I would say that there are we have a very big country, so it's difficult to monitor everything. But I would say that it's really well monitored, mainly in the central part and in the southern part in Brazil. This is all, how to say, GPS monitored, and well, it's satellite images that monitor all these stuffs. So it's really very well applied in the central and southern part of Brazil, and less successfully applied in the Amazon region because of it's a huge extension of land. So we have problems in making the law be respected by people.
Okay. Pedro has posted a picture in the chat box, and that is the invasion of Eragostis plana. And if you download it, Eragostis is on the left and native pampa grass is on the right. So it's quite striking. Another option, if you don't want to type your question, is to raise your hand and then we can unmute you. Do we have any other questions, please?
Anyway, thank you, Pedro, for the picture.
Okay, we have a question from William Bond. Are there plans to export these agricultural systems to Africa?
Sorry, would you repeat again?
Sure, no problem. Are there any plans to export these agricultural systems to Africa?
I don't think so. No. Well, I know that Embrapa is an important player regarding integrated crop livestock systems, and they work a lot with African countries. but I don't know how or if they are really doing that, exporting these systems. I don't know really, sorry.
Okay. I mean, potentially, as Kevin has already mentioned, language could be a barrier to the rest of countries adopting the system.
It is. Yes, it is. Unfortunately, yes, because Brazil is the only country that speaks Portuguese. All the others speak Spanish, and most people don't speak a second language or speak barely a second language like me. Well, so yeah, this is a barrier, and unfortunately, science probably is one of the ways that we can, overcome this barrier. No, hopefully.
Yeah. Another comment from Pedro. He says that Eragostus is often brought in on car wheels. So, maybe systems need to be developed to sanitize car wheels. That's something we look into. Okay, now we have a question from Janke. Have you investigated more diverse mixtures for your cover crops?
Yes, mixing grasses and legumes and mixing 3 or 4 different species. Yes, this is one of our treatments in that rice paddy field experiment, where we increase the diversity. The question is exactly the diversity of mixtures.
And then a very similar question from Zigrin. She says, would it not be beneficial to have the pasture component as a more complex mixture to also include deeper rooted species and legumes?
Yes, the most diverse and the most functional diverse pastures in the pasture rotation would increase. Not only, I didn't present, for example, results on soil microbiology and showing that we can even increase not only the microbial biomass, but also microbial diversity using all these diverse possibilities in the pasture phase and in the cropping phase. So yes, there is a lot to do on it.
Kevin, you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks. I'd like to make maybe more of a comment. In South Africa, I think generally our agriculture occurs at 2 scales. The one is the relatively large commercial scale, where in many instances, livestock are almost kept separate from crop farming. And apart from livestock sometimes grazing crop residues in winter, there's not much integration. So I think we have a big opportunity within our commercial farming sector to follow some of your ideas and to make some improvements there, which will be beneficial to agriculture. But then in particular, in the more smaller farming sector and our communal farming sector, we have livestock and crops, again, in very close proximity. But again, in terms of production systems, they're kept separate mostly. So I think this is actually a huge challenge for us, is to take some of the principles that you have given us and to apply them. So I hope some people are listening to this, and I think we have been challenged quite nicely on that. So thanks a lot for that.
Okay, Kevin, I thank you. Here in Brazil is the same, large commercial scales farming with very separated crops and livestock, and small farms which are experiencing the trend of the decoupling of crops and livestock. So we have to work hard and quick, try to make the reverse of this trend.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Dehan. How big is the contribution of family agriculture in Brazil as a percentage of the Brazilian GDP?
Well, I'm not sure I have the right numbers on that, and even if there are right numbers in that, because in Brazil all the statistics are really difficult to have access or to have solid data on that. But you can think about between 60 and 80% is the most known contribution accepted in everywhere, I would say, as a family agriculture contribution.
Thank you for that. Do we have any other questions?
I don't know in percentage of GDP, sorry, in percentage. What?
No, fair enough. I think we've got a good overview of as an answer to that question. Thank you. I'm not seeing any other raised hands or questions. Last chance. Nope. Here we go. From Zululand, need to know the methane emissions in terms of percentages on their farm. So do you have any idea on methane emissions?
Well, in the extension program, we are not measuring methane emissions. We have been measured on experimental units, you know. Let me see the question. Need to know methane emissions in terms of percentage of their farm. No, I in percentage of the farm, I don't know. And this is a very difficult question because the production systems are really, really different. So we work in the extension program, for example, looking at the whole farm. We work on, I would say, directions. For example, using the rotatinous stocking concept. So we have data that with that compared to traditional rotational systems, we can decrease in 72% of methane emissions per unit of carcass produced when used rotatinous stocking. This is a number from the sheep, the small farm sheep rotations with soybean. In terms of beef cattle, we have not the emissions per unit carcass, but per unit live weight gain. And then the right sward high management and the rotatinous concept can decrease more than 50% of the methane emissions. What we published in the last one in the Journal of Cleaner Production and the first one on the Science of Total Environment. So I can say at farm level and in the practice because we have an access of that.
Fun, thanks you for that. They wanted to know about the reduction, so that's answered the question. Thank you. Barry, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. My question's been answered to a degree, in that so much of the literature says that beef farming is bad for climate change, bad for carbon emissions. Now, this research seems to show different, that an integrated system is better for climate change. It's better for biodiversity conservation. So what are we doing to get that message out there to debunk all the nonsense that's spoken that livestock are destroying our climate? Thank you.
Thank you for this easy question. Well, yeah, this is really a challenge. I don't know how to answer, but well, we have numbers. We have been publishing our results. We are trying to teach our students. We are trying to go into the media. But the other part, the other message are really, really strong. So yeah, I'm not sure that we are we are going to reverse this trend, but we have numbers, and of course I'm talking about integrated crop livestock systems and compare it to something, to some baseline of some production systems, so we can prove that we can mitigate and we can adapt to climate change. We can redesign these systems. So compared to the actual trend of intensification by specialization, the integration of crops and livestock are I would say, a good alternative to decrease the emissions per unit of food produced. We have a lot of data on that. But the media trend is quite different, and there are artists and other influential persons that are thinking and saying differently. So what can we do as a scientist? This is this is difficult.
Jim has a question for you. Jim would like to know, what is the lower rainfall limit for success in these systems?
If you think that integrated systems are worldwide, it's not a Brazilian idea, no? So you can have it, you have it in different ways in Africa, in Asia, from less than 600 millimeters to up to 3,500 millimeters in some regions in Brazil. So it's, I would say it's everywhere. It's very, obviously the results are not the same. You cannot have the level of diversity that we can work depends on the edaphic climatic zones. But I would say that the rainfall is not a limit to the success.
That's interesting. Okay, I'm going to take the last question now. That's from Intutuko. Besides the case study presented, is there any evidence that livestock performance is improved through using the system?
Oh yeah, we have, I would say, practical data from all those farms, almost 2,000 farms. And we have a lot of scientific data as well. So we work with beef cattle, with dairy cattle, with sheep in native grasslands, in annual temperate grasses, in permanent temperate grasses, annual tropical grasses, permanent tropical grasses. So we have been working in a lot of situations, and we can say that when you use the moderate grazing, using the concept that we have been using, yes, you have improvements in animal performance in terms of one of the papers that I presented for the rotachinos, for example. You can have measures of how much of dry matter you need for a kilogram of carcass produced, which is much less in rotachinos stocking. And so it's not only to say that it's not only the animal performance in terms of the amount of animal products, but also we are talking about quality of the animal products being, and even more, the quality of the, I would say, the pastoral environment, because when we measure also animal metabolites linked to animal well-being. So it's increased. When animals are eating well, this is the welfare. Many people talk about welfare in general, but I'm talking about nutritional welfare. And we can show that traditional rotational stocking, meaning traditional by the system in which we set the interval between defoliations, trying to increase pasture growth, and we use the pasture with, would say, higher stocking rates, trying to increase the efficiency of forage harvested. In this situation where animals are forced to graze down the pasture up to almost the soil, they are very stressed by this kind of stocking method. And there is a lot of kinds of stocking method that force animals to not lose forage, isn't it? So yeah, it's much more than animal performance. We have data on that. Thank you.
Could I squeeze in one last final question?
Sure.
Soil compaction was reduced by a decreasing livestock number. So how many animals per grazing unit would you have in a no-till integrated system?
Okay, well, I would say that it depends on the pasture that we are talking about. But in the example that I use it, okay, yes, of course, soil compaction decrease as the animal numbers decrease, of course. No? But what is important is that in that example, the sward heights were 40 centimeters, meaning 1 steer per hectare, going to 10 centimeters, which is 5 steers per hectare. So there is an increase in soil compaction, but it's very difficult to detect up to 20 centimeters. And then you can detect the animal compaction. And when you detect animal compaction, it's very sharp. It's not deep in the soil. Let's say that in the soybean succeeding this pasture phase, even if you use with the wrong livestock rate, stocking rate, you cannot have negative impacts on the soybean succeeding those areas. However, with the 10 centimeters, 5 animals per hectare, you don't have the cover enough to prevent from plant invasion, for example. So you will produce probably the same amount of soybean, but with more costs using chemicals to control invasive plants. In that protocol, we concluded in 16 years of experiment that the exact sward height to be used is 23 centimeters for a mixture of oat and ryegrass. Meaning that you, in an integrated crop livestock systems, you have to look at not only the animal performance, not only the soybean performance, but you have to look at the whole system performance, including many indicators of the soil component. So 23 and also the impact in terms of environment, for example, in methane emissions, as we talk later. So 23 centimeters is between 23 and 30 centimeters is the range exactly where you have almost all positive responses in terms of stocking rate. This means in that experiment, around 900 kilograms live weight as stocking rate. 2.5 steers, more or less.
Right, thank you very much for that. And I know you asked for only easy questions to be posted to you, but thank you for dealing with all those difficult questions. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Debbie.
Kevin is waving at us. He's muted. Kevin's unmuted.
Trying to get unmuted there. Thanks a lot. Paulo, thank you very much for that really interesting talk. It's given us a really good overview of, I think, agricultural or integrated systems that we are not really focusing on in South Africa. And you've obviously done a huge amount of work, you and your colleagues in Brazil, on this. And I think we need to congratulate you on that. You've obviously done a lot of work. And
thank you.
Fantastic. And I really like the term rotationist. I'm going to have to go and read up your papers to see exactly how rotationist grazing works, but it's always nice to get a new term. And I see you drinking some mate there. I haven't had mate for a long time.
Yeah.
And Paulo, thank you very much once again, and we really appreciate it. And thanks for giving up your time, for giving us a really interesting talk, and for challenging us to look a little bit differently at what we do and how we do it. And hopefully we'll have a lot more contact in future, and I'm sure you'll have some of the audience contacting you privately via email to address further questions and further issues. But thank you very much. And then just on our webinar series for the next webinar, which will be taking place on Thursday, the 8th of April, we will have Navashni Govender from Kruger National Park talking about essentially evidence-based fire management in protected areas. So you can put that in your diary, and we'll start advertising that with all the details next week. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. And once again, Paulo, thank you very much for giving up your time and for giving us a really interesting talk. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you all.
Thank you, Paulo. Have a good evening, everyone.